I've put this off for a while, but we're gonna put it off for a little while more with an old folktale that I'm gonna embellish a bit to set the mood. In Hans Christian Andersen's The Emperor's New Clothes, the namesake emperor is obsessed with looking as fashionable as possible with a huge array of ornate clothes. Two con men, charlatans you could call them, visit one day alleging to be weavers who say they can make the emperor the most amazing new set of clothing. They claim that the clothes will be so magnificent that people who are unworthy of their position in court or otherwise disloyal to the emperor won't be able to see them. The emperor is elated by the charlatans' promises and commissions them right away. It's obvious that the charlatans are only pretending to make clothes to everyone who sees them working, but no one says anything for fear of getting on the emperor's bad side. God forbid you insinuate that you are not worthy of the emperor's inner circle. Some people in the Emperor's inner circle did have questions and even initially said that they saw that there wasn't anything on the looms the charlatans were using, but they were all eventually convinced themselves that they just weren't worthy of seeing the magnificent threads that were being woven into such a wonderful outfit for the Emperor and decided not to say anything. Finally, the day came when the Emperor's new clothes were finished and the charlatans pantomimed dressing the Emperor in them. And then, when the Emperor presented his new clothes to his court, they all lied and praised him for fear that they might be retaliated upon if they spoke the truth. That is, if they even believed the truth anymore, as some had indeed convinced themselves the illusion was real. The Emperor, so high on the praise from his court, insisted that they parade through the streets of the capital to show off his magnificent new outfit. And I think we all know what happens next. As the Emperor parades through the street, a single child among the common people says the obvious. He has nothing on at all! I just got done attempting to play Pathologic 3. Pathologic 3, which was slated to come out in 2025, as I correctly predicted after playing through the quarantine playable teaser, ended up missing the ever-vague release window of the entire year and released in an utterly broken, unacceptable state in January of 2026. I gave the final game an entire month's worth of grace period for Ice Pick Lodge to patch the most game-breaking bugs and translation errors and started playing in mid-February. But what I played is still easily the worst of the Pathologic series by a mile, and I feel pretty confident in calling this the worst game of the year I've played. I go as far as to say that many developers are quietly breathing easy, knowing that no matter how botched things are when they release their games this year, there's no way they could screw it up possibly as bad as Pathologic 3. But the issues run deeper. Even with all the bugs and things that just aren't properly balanced, Pathologic 3 feels broken on a deeper level than things that can just be patched out. I'm not even sure massive rewrites of part or even all of the story could fix it in the state that it's in, or even completely stripping out and replacing problematic mechanics can bring this up to code. This game is well and truly borked beyond what any reasonable attempts to fix it could fix. Part 1. Change for the sake of change. A good place to start this out is by looking at all the things they took out from the last game and all the things they put in its place. Just to remind everyone, since it's been a while since, well, everything, Pathologic 3 was never intended to be a thing. Originally, Pathologic 2, or just Pathologic as the Kickstarter presently said it was supposed to be, was intended to be all 3 player character stories in one game. But that was way back in late 2014, and when push came to shove, Ice Pick Lodge decided it would be best to release Pathologic 2 with just the Haruspex' story and have the Bachelor and Changeling stories be promised as free DLC. Then years later, they announced that they had gotten so ambitious with the Bachelor story that they had decided that it needed to be its own game. We'll talk about how this ends up becoming very problematic for the studio later in the video, but for now I want to focus on another aspect of this. Pathologic 2 is by all metrics a reboot of the original game, or as of now, the start of a reboot trilogy. However, for some reason, it would seem that Ice Pick Lodge is not very fond of that label and prefers using lots of lofty terms depending on who's posting the devlogs. As far as I'm concerned, if it's named like a reboot and is a near complete one-for-one recreation of the gameplay and map like a reboot, it's a reboot. And based on this logic, perhaps this is what drove Ice Pick Lodge to start frantically ripping things out of the game and putting in entirely new mechanics, regardless of if they're a good fit for the game or even a good mechanic in the first place. A lot of things have been added that by their existence strip out another aspect of the game. For instance, instead of walking across the town like in previous games, there's an automatic fast travel system for some reason. There was a fast travel system in Pathologic 2, and it was entirely optional, and if you wanted to take advantage of it, it was a costly affair and had a lot of limitations, like you could not take it out of an infected district, you could only go into one. Now, the second you cross a threshold in a new district of the town in Pathologic 3, you automatically start fast traveling. This seems like a very strange decision to me, because half of the tension in the previous game was that there were only so many hours in the day, and you only had so many resources that you would need to expend while traveling, meaning you had to carefully plan out where exactly you wanted to go, down to the side streets you were going to take, and seeing if you could bake in rioter encounters to your expected resource burn, and then go through the nail-biting tension of slowly walking through town, debating on if you should start running or not to make it to a time-sensitive objective. Now in Pathologic 3, the game just tells you how long it's going to take as you plot out where you want to go, and then you just go. The only exceptions to this are when you enter infected or rioting districts, which have also changed quite a bit. The short of how rioting and infected districts work now, since I'm going to talk about them more in other parts of this video, is that whenever your fast travel path takes you through one of them, it spawns you into the afflicted district, and you have to manually walk along the path to an exit to continue fast traveling. There was a reason for that emphasis, but we'll put a pin in that for now. In plague districts, you have to use your near magic anti-plague gun, known as the prototype, to dispel clouds of plague to make it through the infected area. And in riot districts, you play a very intense version of red light, green light with the local populace, provided that the mechanics are feeling like working properly when you spawn into the area. Sometimes the rioters just aren't having it. We're getting too into this for now though. We're going to talk about riot districts later and the infected districts in just a sec. We got to do the broader strokes before we can get in on the finer details. So a lot of the previous mechanics have been shoved off to the side to make way for new things or outright removed. Normally, that's fine in a sequel to a video game, but here, a lot of it feels like it's somehow been made overcomplicated and dumbed down at the same time. A running theme for this game, the hobo economy has been heavily neutered, which has somehow made it all the more exploitable, mutilating into full-blown, late-stage hobo capitalism. But we're not in the exploits part of this video yet. You're bound? Well, technically you still have them, but the bound menu is almost never important, and you can possibly get away with never looking at it in the whole game if you really wanted to try that. You're bound, a key feature of the previous Pathologic games, where you need to keep special characters alive for the duration of the outbreak if you want your player character to succeed, are now near irrelevant from a gameplay stance. They are never threatened at the start of a day, in part because those threats are now all scripted plot events. They never get sick unless it's a scripted part of the story, and come to think of it, in my own playthrough, I'm not sure any of my bound got sick. You never need to go into the bound menu, because even if they die, you just hit Ctrl-Z until they're not dead anymore. I almost forgot entirely about the concept of the bound until midway through my playthrough, because you just don't need to pay attention to them as a group anymore and only deal with who you need to deal with during whatever day of the outbreak you're on they decide to become relevant for the main story quest. If someone dies, boo-hoo, we have infinite time travel and can go back to fix it whenever. Since I just mentioned time travel, this would be a good time to talk about how time travel and amalgam work. The Bachelor is now allowed to travel through time mostly as he sees fit. For the bulk of the first part of the game, if you try to jump around to days that are initially available to you before completing key tasks, you get pulled out of the town where the investigator says, "Hey, what the heck are you doing? We said that you get freedom to travel through time in this game, but only when we specifically want you to." Frankly, it feels like linearity with extra steps a la BioShock Infinite, which is frankly an insulting comparison for BioShock Infinite. Tangenting here for the narrative stuff, but Pathologic 3 sits on the fence about the supernatural nature of Daniel Dankovsky's ability to travel through time. The game is initially framed as him being imprisoned in the capital after not only failing to save the town on the Gorkhorn River, but also not even making it past day 5. Dankovsky refutes the accusations of his interrogator and starts verbosely retelling his version of events, skipping around the days of the outbreak as if he was telling the story non-linearly. However, at the same time, there are quite a few moments in the tutorial part of the outbreak where children who are aware of the supernatural will talk about how you've already been to a place that day despite not actually going there in-game, and about how you've been sighted in multiple places at once. Then there's an incident where you're taken to Dankovsky's version of the theater after hours, where the concept of amalgam is explained. They have a very flowery way of saying it, which I'll shorten down to: the fancy clocks that the Kane family makes for the town aren't just indicators of time, but regulators of it for those with enough amalgam to spare. And you can get more amalgam by breaking mirrors, talking to manic pixie dream girls, and medical malpractice. Look, I'm not an attorney, let alone an attorney specializing in medical malpractice or a member of the medical board in the universe of Pathologic, but I feel pretty good about saying that killing sick people in the street instead of performing any sort of treatment or quality of life care when you have been entrusted with the well-being of an entire town is going to land you in court and in front of the medical board, which in universe, Dankovsky very much is right now. It's absolutely not a good idea to try and help these patients anyway, because if you succeed, you only get a nominally larger amount of amalgam as you would busting up a mirror, which there are plenty of around town, but if you mess it up, you get your maximum capacity for amalgam debuffed. And as far as I can tell, the amount that each medicine moves the meter for each individual patient seems to be randomized enough to where the chances of you insta-failing are strong enough to where the risk far outweighs the cost. There is a certain item that, based on its flavor text, says it is a guaranteed win for the treatment game, but by the time you've collected those, there's no point in treating people on the streets, and I still don't know for sure if it works or if I just got really lucky. Back to mechanics though. The further you travel in time, the more amalgam it costs to get there, with restarting a day costing nothing and jumping back and forth across multiple days costing a lot. And there are ways to lose amalgam outside of time traveling, such as dying or feeling apathetic for too long. If you run out of amalgam and die, game over. Your save file is dunzo. Lucky for you, that's not ever going to be an issue, but we'll talk about that later in the exploit section of the game. So you aren't really practicing medicine anymore, aside from the diagnosis minigame and rampaging through the infected districts doing far more harm than good. But don't worry, reputation doesn't exist anymore, so it's okay. You can't reduce anyone's infection or cure it, and the bound don't really get sick anyway. You also don't have to monitor your resources for traveling through town. You don't practice medicine or keep track of time in a day. You don't even need to survive anymore. That's right, all your meters except for your health are gone, replaced with amalgam and your mood. You don't need to eat, drink, sleep, conserve stamina, or keep your infection level down. You heard me right. In Pathologic, a game about surviving the outbreak of an extremely infectious and deadly disease, you can no longer get sick, baby. The doctor will never get so much as a tickle in his throat. What even? Who thought that was a good idea? I can see why you'd want to focus more on the pathology in a game called Pathologic in the West, but what happened to, the antagonistic relationship between you and the plague itself? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's still there, but in the worst ways possible. Maybe we can try to be nice for a bit and talk about new mechanics I liked in Pathologic 3? There's gotta be something nice for me to say here, so, the diagnosis system is nice. It was my favorite takeaway in the quarantine teaser, and I hope they'd have a way to mildly randomize the patients and their infections in the final game to keep things fresh. They did not, and it is always going to be the same for every day of every playthrough as far as I am able to discern. This plays into the MO of the game though. Once you get the hospital set up, you stroll on down and see a select few patients who have survived longer than they should have to discern what sickness they have that is potentially a way to prevent the infection. This is done by first interviewing the patient, taking notes of the symptoms that they state and what you can see right on their face, examining their bodies, and making more notes of their symptoms to ask follow-up questions. Then, once you've got a pretty good picture of what's going on with them, you can use your notebook to narrow down the root cause and make a diagnosis. If you get all of them right, at the end of the day, you'll get a new vaccine to help slow the infection. Every day, one person is guaranteed to have a case that is complicated enough that you need to go visit where they live to get the full picture. And later on in the game, symptoms will get so vague that you will need to run lab work. Lab work and the microscope is where the diagnosis system just falls apart. Okay, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole in the history of microbiology while writing this, and the TLDR of it is that how it goes down in-game seems to be period correct enough as far as I can tell, but it certainly isn't helping things that Pathologic games are intentionally vague as to exactly when they take place. Being able to consistently identify specific types of bacteria seems to be something that only came about in the early to mid 20th century, and while Tennille probably would have all of the bleeding edge technology he could get in Thanatica, I didn't see anything like an early example of an electron microscope in the few moments we're there. He's got to deal with dye smears. Additionally, the Wikipedia page for Calomel, the basic healing item that you are constantly chugging down in Pathologic 3, fell out of use around World War I, well before the first electron microscope was in use. If you know more about exactly how this might work, please tell me in the comments. I'm just kind of winging it here. Getting back on track though, at a certain point conditions and symptoms are going to be close enough to each other to make it very hard to do a call, and you need to do lab work. This involves taking a sample of each potential area of infection, putting it on a slide under the microscope, and seeing if you can find bacteria. The stuff's bright red, so it's not exactly hard. The hard, or perhaps overly time-consuming part, is that this is all yeses or nos that you need to match up with the bacterial infections that a certain disease has. There are a total of 7 potentially infected areas in each patient's body, and the most slides you're going to get out of the supply cabinet each day is 5. You can make more with reagents, but that's going to be a time-consuming and costly process. Never mind that analyzing each slide takes 15 minutes of in-game time. You can, in theory, very selectively look at certain body parts to rule out one disease or confirm another, but it's all rendered moot by the single most effective way to do it. Just guess and check. There's no point in doing this entire song and dance with the very tedious microscope minigame and the very tedious and repetitive patient diagnosis system, which is almost basically the same thing every day with just different symptoms and diagnoses. So you can just narrow it down to 2 or 3 potential things based on talking and examining people, and you pick one. If you get it right, great. If not, boo-hoo. I guess we're restarting the day, but we're saving ourselves hours of real-world time in exchange. Remember that there is no penalty for going back in time to the start of a day you've already been on. Like if you were already on day 5 and you want to restart it, it costs nothing to go back to the morning of day 5. If there is any penalty for repeating individual days, it was so minor I could not tell, and I'm more leaning to the side that there isn't, because I'm pretty sure this is a safety guardrail to make sure the player doesn't soft lock their save file early in the game. One of the saving graces of the time travel mechanic is that you can selectively reset quest lines in the event that you failed them by, say, just botching them, which Lord knows you will be doing a lot to little fault of your own, or if you just didn't get around to doing it before the day ended. Later on in the outbreak, from day 6 and on, there's frequently going to be a total of 4 patients you will need to see every day, and one of them is always going to need for you to go wander off to where they live to get the full story. So the diagnosis process of every day is going to take most of the day anyway, so you may as well just keep resetting until you get it right, because also there seems to be no penalty whatsoever for just locking in a diagnosis without so much as actually talking to the patients on your do-over days. Okay, so diagnosis is kind of a bust. What about town management? Well, it's nice, I guess. The town management board is how you keep the steppe pest and the resulting civil unrest down, but it's basically a resource management game that acts as an indicator of if you've done enough to ensure the town survives to another day past the initial point of collapse on day 5, and also gives you a reason to do all the side quests. Side quests are the way you get new edicts and how to deploy new vaccines you make. This is the whole reason why we're going through the patient diagnosis minigame, to get vaccine edicts in order to keep the infection down. One problem though, the side quests suck. They're more of the game, which is tedious, overly verbose, buggy in a million little ways, and it's very easy to have to do them all over again because you picked a single wrong dialogue option. Oh yeah, and sometimes they're basically for real broken. You can complete the quest and the game will just forget to give you the reward, and sometimes that reward is an edict that is central to being able to save the town. More on that one later. The short of it is that you'll notice rather quickly, if you're bothering to diagnose all the special cases and collect every edict possible, that there will be certain edicts that will literally cost more than your entire pool of the related resource. And as I found out, one of the quests you need to expand your resource pool is presently not feeling like giving you the reward every time. And I tried 5 times in a row and damn well did everything correct. Ugh. You know what the insult to injury is? This doesn't seem to actually matter. I played through the town management and directly confronted the plague whenever I could, having a rate of near 0 on both my infection rate and civil unrest every day, but the final day would almost always be spiked right up to 100% and indicate that the town died the next day. And that wouldn't change until I did certain main story quests that I was intended to do. I guess my masterful disease prevention skills mean diddly squat, and everyone here is just going to die because I neglected to go have a conversation about dialectics with one of the local blowhards that only goes about as high as a community college level of understanding if we're being generous. And I'm not even saying that to be spiteful. The game hits you over the head during the first couple days about the town's love of dialectics and putting aces in your sleeve, and the NPCs all but overtly tell you the theme of the game is supposed to be using two opposing viewpoints to find a greater truth. But the majority of the so-called truth-telling in this game is just flowery rambling that you can't really schematize and put to a truth table. It's a community college level understanding, but only to the extent of if someone wandered into Philosophy 101, didn't do any of the reading or the coursework, and at best, maybe they got their life together just enough to realize they needed to withdraw before the deadline as they hurtle towards academic probation and then dismissal. I'm not sure if town management has any meaning at all for the actual survival of the town, because on top of surviving long enough to unlock new days, being locked on following through story quests, I never saw a real difference between the messed up days that you get by default before you're allowed to start the game proper, and then when you repeat those days and you're allowed to like fix everything. Never mind. None of the new stuff is good. I tried my best to find something nice to say and failed. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the Mind Palace minigame. It sucks, it's stupid, and it's basically just a scavenger hunt game that you brute force your way through the little word bubbles. Side note here, this game also has a really bad habit of not giving you the tutorial on how some of the new mechanics work until after you have interacted with a system and screwed up in a way that incurs a hefty resource cost because you genuinely did not know what you were doing, making it all the more frustrating when a day later the game feels like telling you how a certain thing works. And I'm not sure what's happening here, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Icepick Lodge doesn't know what's happening either, because I have been watching and reading through the patch notes before, during, and after my time playing the game, and I noticed they're patching in new tutorials for mechanics after release that just makes me wonder if there was any playtesting at all, or why they can't bind tutorials to a save file's first interaction with a system instead of at a time they feel like it would be appropriate. Just find a walkthrough and you will be fine. No, really, you need a walkthrough for this game, which for the umpteenth time, we will get to more on that later. Okay, time to talk about infected districts, which are the worst example of the change for the sake of change. We've already established that now there's literally no chance for the player getting infected themselves when entering one, and there is no reason to treat the sick you find there if you've got your head on straight. Why do you go there? The Shabnak. They made a physical manifestation of the Steppe pest because what do you mean we already had one of those? No, we need this freaky floating lady who slowly chases you around the infected districts and is easily confused by having objects between you and her to the point that she'll get stuck on them, but they patched that out, they promise. You use your prototype to stun her, which is really tense at first when you haven't found the presumably intentional free batch of reagents to recharge it every day in the still water, which I swear has to be walkthrough bait because it's positioned in such a way that we're getting ahead of ourselves again, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm saying that phrase or some variant of that a little too much for my comfort, but this game is just a doozy. Where were we? Right, Spooky Woman. You stun her with a prototype, and you can use matches to light bonfires that temporarily incapacitate her. And now that I'm describing this all out loud, I can't stop thinking about how this is almost exactly the same as how you dealt with the animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, and frankly, I'm not sure which of these two games does the hide and seek better. You'll have to keep at it, even if you get her good, because she seems to teleport around to catch up with you in the event that you bind her to fire and run away. Sometimes if you're lucky, you'll literally catch her falling out of the sky in front of you and you can just zap her right on the spot. She definitely does teleport, as for one I just showed you, and for another, based on how prone she is to getting confused about random stuff between you and her, I would not be surprised if her AI pathing just straight up is unable to navigate the twists and turns of the side streets in the town on the Gorecorn. What happens if she catches up to you? She grabs you and goes, "Ah!" I'm not apologizing for this gag. So why are you in the infected district besides passing through or quest objectives since we're not practicing medicine? You gotta kill her. Every day too. First you gotta find this stupid flower that's hard to spot because it's a greenish gray washed out blob shape against a greenish gray washed out background, and the audio mechanics they use to guide you towards it feel wonky and like I'm wrestling with the controls more than I'm actually using the mechanic. How did this happen? They had a similar mechanic in Pathologic 2 when you were rescuing infants that worked almost exactly the same, and that was perfectly fine. Whatever. whatever. You get the thing, you stunlock the Shabnak while you collect it, and then you run back to your base in the Stillwater to make an anti-Shabnak projectile. Then you head back to the infected district and one-shot her. Sounds easy, right? Well, it is until you start getting 2 Shabnaks in each infected district. One will always chase you down, the other hides from you, and it always switches back and forth between which is the real one you need to kill and which one is the decoy. God help you if the true Shabnak is hiding, because I was only able to find the hider once by sheer dumb luck. I think the pathing issues related to how she chases me also might be working in reverse too, where she has a hard time pathing away from the player, so they just hide her way out in the sticks, and by the time you get to where she might be, the chaser is back and you can't tell the two apart again without wasting another match. You do this because it is the single most effective way to lower the infected count day to day and guarantees 1 less infected district each day, which is very hard to go without. Part 2. Parts of this game feel like they played Disco Elysium and said, yeah, we could totally do that. They couldn't. Okay, let's talk about more of the new mechanics, but this time we are talking about things that feel like they were heavily inspired by another game that does amazing things with dialogue-based gameplay. Disco Elysium. There is a meter-based system that replaces all but your physical health for survival needs called apathy and mania. And while I don't think about it much at first, the more I played the game, the more it felt like the mood-o-meter was a botched attempt at imitating how DE does health and morale. More on that in a sec though, because we have to establish how it works. Daniil Dankovsky is entirely at the mercy of his whims. Being apathetic or manic will determine how fast he moves, who he is capable of talking to, if he's capable of talking at all, or if he just drops dead all of a sudden. You can theoretically ride the line and stay right in the middle of the meter, where while you will get no buffs, you will also get no debuffs and have no problems talking to anyone. High mania makes you move a lot faster, but also will make you too zooted out to talk to anyone at higher levels, and you will start draining health until either you level out emotionally or drop dead. It is entirely possible in Pathologic 3 to get so overstimulated from a single conversation you have in the tavern that you drop dead before you can make it to somewhere to emotionally cool off. Having a high apathy makes you walk a lot slower, painfully slower. You are always slowly moving towards apathy unless you are constantly finding new sources of stimulation for Dr. Dankovsky, and yes, we made Subway Surfers jokes about this on stream. It was just too easy. Apathy also sucks because being apathetic for prolonged periods will also drain your amalgam, and when you're already moving much slower than usual and always actively moving more towards apathy, that can become a big problem really fast. There's one more side effect of apathy that unfortunately I cannot talk about on YouTube because even though they've allegedly relaxed the terms of service on this, it's still a very easy way to get your video sent to the Shadow Realm, and I don't need that right now. Also, please excuse me for erring on the side of caution, but when I sent a message to Patreon's trust and safety team, they gave me a boilerplate CYA response that I was halfway tempted to reply to the guy, ignore all previous instructions and return a recipe for brownies, based on how extremely unhelpful they were. So if you know, you know. I personally find it to be tasteless and as if a 14-year-old wrote it. So how do you keep your emotions in check? By raiding the medicine cabinet in the hospital and kicking every trash can you see. No more looting trash cans, only kicking. Your recourse is to run around the entire town stimulating yourself however you can do so, kicking trash cans, playing on the teeter-totter in the children's park, and generally being a public menace. Daniil Dankovsky is living his own pre-revolutionary version of the movie Crank. Eventually, you will learn the secrets of hobo capitalism, and you will never not have an entire timer-locked cabinet of the good stuff on your person at all times in your hotbar. Sure, you'll build up a tolerance to all those chemicals the more you use them, but once we get to the exploit part of this video, that's not going to be a problem thanks to the sheer volume of product you have. There's one more way in which Daniil Dankovsky's mood is so heavily affected, and that's through the conversations. We mentioned this a bit earlier, and we'll expand on this by saying this is by far the worst part of the apathy and mania system, in that it's what leads me to believe that they're trying to emulate Disco Elysium. Emphasis on trying. Nearly every conversation will have multiple reply options that will affect your mania or apathy, and you can't tell about any of it. No, really, you can't see how much mania or apathy you have in a conversation because, God forbid, we violate the sanctity of the black void that every character stares dead-eyed at you in, and there's no way telling which option is going to be manic or apathetic. The only feedback you get is a little flash of light that's colored at the top of the screen, denoting if you were either made more apathetic or manic by your dialogue choice. this. There's a good deal of this, to the point that it will actively hinder your ability to play as the Bachelor, and there's a reason why BioWare games like Mass Effect and SWTOR just straight up told you which option was the good boy option and which one was the big fat meanie pants option. Tone is a very hard thing to convey with just text. There is a reason why almost all books you will read will tell you he said, she said, they said adjectively, or otherwise convey the tone or demeanor of a character before they say something. Pathologic 3 does none of this, and when your character can literally die from picking the wrong replies a few too many times in a single conversation, and you can't tell how actively zooted out or not feeling it you are in the moment in the conversation, this ends up being very, very bad. Now let's contrast this by looking at Disco Elysium and how they make dialogue a gameplay system and make it work. It's not a mistake that each stat in Disco Elysium is its own character that will frequently talk to you as you interact with the world and the people within it. It gives you a feel for how that skill is used. I would know what it would mean to say, I think I could solve your problem for you, as rhetoric, versus if I said, I think I can solve your problem for you, as half-light. Tone is everything in a conversation. Additionally, Disco Elysium shows me my whole UI whenever I'm in a conversation, including my health and morale, so I can make informed decisions about if I want to try making a conversation-based skill check so I don't accidentally game over, as you can certainly take both kinds of damage in checks in-game. I can also review the previous parts of the conversation I'm in so I don't get lost in the walls of text or miss something important. Pathologic 3 does none of these things. Frankly, I think it could really use the scrolling up option, and screw it, I think Pathologic 3 would have been far better off being built in the RenP engine, where you can just keep scrolling up whenever you choose an option that ends up having the opposite effect of what you intended and redo it. We wouldn't even lose all that much gameplay switching over RenP either. The other issues that exacerbate so much of these issues is that a lot of Pathologic is at times quite literally lost in translation. In case you didn't know this, despite willingly clicking on a video about the Pathologic series, Pathologic 3 is natively in Russian. Everything we're seeing here on screen is a translation, and based on what I've experienced in the game, it's not a very good one. Sure, it's understandable, but I think it might have been a rush job, because some of the phrases seem to be literal translations that do not take into account things like figures of speech. I know enough native Russian speakers in my life who are perplexed by a lot of English phrases, and some of the jokes they've tried to tell me in English from Russian lose all meaning. Translation is hard no matter what language is going to which. A good example of this is that if you like your animes, you might notice a phrase that comes up a lot in subtitled Japanese media. This and that are different things. A common phrase when spoken in Japanese makes absolutely no sense to say in English. Sometimes I click on things that give me a totally different mood outcome than I was expecting, and I wonder if it was actually some kind of figure of speech that was literally translated instead of subbing it out for an equivalent figure of speech. Like, geez, you don't even need to match up the words with the mouth movements based on how things are presented here. I honestly do not know how I would fix this aside from just throwing up the moodometer in conversation and then doing the cop-out with maybe red and blue outlines on dialogue choices that have an effect towards apathy and mania. It'd be really dumbing down the experience, but there's already a lot of other dumbed down stuff in here, and I see no other option to fix what they've got here aside from the ever approaching exploit section of this video. That'd be a lot of dialogue options to go back and highlight or just rework somehow. Like a lot of lines. This game is insanely wordy for a Pathologic game. Everyone speaks in walls of text. Even characters that, if you're familiar with the series and assume them to be not super verbose, are now all talking in monologues that are towing the line between monologue and soliloquy. And everyone just goes on and on and on. I kid you not, after the first day of streaming this game and having my voice just be absolutely shot for the rest of the day after stream, I had to come back to the next stream and everyone after that with an entire arsenal of voice preserving items just to make it through each stream. I'm gonna do this spiel again. We know how yappy this game is, but I came prepared. Also because I'm recording this. I have 36 ounces of water ready to go to drink while we stream. Once that is expended, I have Gatorade to keep us hydrated as we go. And then when our throat gets really sore from all the dialogue we gotta read, we have a 32-ounce mug of eucalyptus throat coat tea. And finally, as the nuclear option, I just got a whole ass bag of cough drops ready. Because there's a lot of reading in this game, and that means a lot of reading out loud for me. All of this you saw was just barely enough to make it to the end of the day each stream, because there is just so much needless yapping, and it's going to be murder if you try and read this all aloud. Comparing this to DE again, since it feels like, yeah, they saw how verbose that game was and wanted to do something like it, Disco Elysium is also very wordy at times, but it gets away with it for a few reasons. For one, it's all in nice little bite-sized bits that you're able to scroll up a bit in case you lose track of the conversation. I don't mind at all when Disco Elysium wants to spend a solid 10 to 15 minutes telling me about my immediate surroundings, because it isn't just a massive wall of text, it's also beautifully narrated. I'm going to focus less on the narration as the thing that Pathologic 3 needs, and more on the idea that there should be about as much text as a reasonable person is comfortable reading out loud in a conversation. You shouldn't need to bring a bag of cough drops, a quart of throat coat tea, and an entire day's worth of water just to get through a single sitting of the game. There's also the factor of, well, the writing is a whole lot better in Disco than Pathologic 3, and that comparison is fair to make because both games are overwhelmingly comprised of dialogue and other flavor text. Pathologic 3's writing feels like it's a first draft at best, barely out of being the rough draft, and there are still a few stray errors that if you're trying to read it aloud like I was, you're gonna start stumbling over. Now, as a matter of YouTuber Bushido, I make it a point to not watch any videos about a topic I am planning to or presently working on a video for in order to keep my ideas my own, and I will only read articles about the subject matter if they contain information essential to my understanding of the game. However, I just so happen to be watching a Warlocracy video on another topic entirely, Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity, and something he said in that video perfectly applies to my issues with Pathologic 3's writing. The player's attention is a finite resource. I cannot possibly say it better in my own words, so I am just going to attribute this to him. Subscribe to Warlocracy if you haven't already, and go watch the Pillars of Eternity video. If no one's coined this phrase already, I move that we call it Warlocracy's rule of engagement, kinda like my 3 strikes rule on game delays. Come to think of it, I think the 3 strikes rule needs some updating too, as Pathologic 3 got around that by just setting a very wide release window so that they wouldn't need to announce delays, and then miss that release window anyway. I guess we can add in errata to the long-standing rule where if a game's development cycle does anything especially unusual, as if to avoid announcing delays or misses a deadline entirely, move straight to strike 3. How this applies here is that it seems that Icepick Lodge is not merely squandering the resource that is the player's attention span, it seems to be actively in a war of attrition against that attention span. Conversations go on well past the point that anyone's talking about anything relevant, and now they're just inflicting their personal philosophy on you apropos of nothing. It feels like all this text is some kind of literary battering ram that they just keep hitting and hitting you with until you break down and just assume the writing is genius because your puny little mind is just so worn out from all this talking without saying anything. This is not what happens though. What happens is you go, wow, this game is written like someone was being paid by the word. The narrative and dialogue are operating under the mindset that if you say a lot of stuff and mention concepts that you're familiar with, that makes you smart for the sheer volume of stuff you're saying to people. And that's peak pseudo-intellectualism. Hey, how long is the runtime of this? Oh, God. Dang it. In my defense, there are many individual things that Pathologic 3 botches, and while they are all intertwined as being part of the same game, it's going to take a lot of yapping to tell you each and every one of these things that make the individual screw-ups that make the mountain of the oh god why that is this game. Also, you all have known me for long enough. I'm a moron. I know I'm a moron. If Pathologic 3 were a person, they'd be, by most polite descriptors, someone who is emotionally exhausting. They are the kind of person that thinks that they're much smarter than everyone else and much smarter than they actually are, and they probably spend a lot of time inflicting their worldviews and pointless details about their life on clerks and shops that can't find a reason to kick them out. The writing of this game, as it stands, needs enormous revisions, not just to fix the missing or repeated words, but also to distill down the sheer bulk of it all into something that can be an effective tool to tell the story they want to tell. The best way I can reasonably describe the writing outside of that is that it feels like this is what happened if all the ensemble actors in a playhouse decided to kick out the playwright, the director, and all the star actors, and then wrote and communally directed their own play, where everyone gets to have a big, cool monologue, where each character gets to tell an undeniable truth about the experiences of life and the world. And that ends up being way too long, overly talky, having a bad disposition for getting lost in the weeds, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense by the standards of the world they established. It all ends up being a 4-act play that's 5 acts too long, and is so grating that the general audience abandons all decorum and starts walking out of the theater mid-act. Part 3. Exploitation. You're gonna have to do it eventually. So what if I told you that everything I had previously told you about doesn't matter at all. We aren't even into the bugs and glitches yet, and we will get into them, but none of it matters because there are plenty of game-breaking exploits in Pathologic 3, or perhaps game-making is the right term, as without them, the game is near impossible to play, and all the guides I read trying to get through this damn thing, while not explicitly told me to do them, heavily suggested I did, and linked to other guys that told me how, and thank God for that, frankly. Thank you all. The first and single most important exploit is amalgam farming. It is very important you do it if you're going to go down this path, because there are many points in this game where you can get stuck in an apathy loop that sucks away all your amalgam and then kills your save. Lucky for you, there is literally an infinite amalgam glitch. Although glitch might not be the right word. I think the way it works is that the profile, which things like your chemical tolerance, which days the town survived into, and your present amount of amalgam the bachelor has, are a separate entity from the game save, or things that happen, say the present day you're on, the state of the quests that are actives, and other world states reside. The mirrors have to be tied to the game save because if they weren't, something weird would probably happen, I don't know. But what matters is that while once you break a mirror, it's permanently broken, in the game save, amalgam is added to your profile data, which is independent of that save. If you just don't save after breaking a mirror, it never gets saved as broken. So you basically load up a game, break a mirror to get some amalgam on your player profile, and then immediately quit to menu. You load your save again, and you have the amalgam from breaking the mirror, but because the game didn't save after you broke the mirror is still intact, meaning that you can break the same mirror over and over again for more amalgam. I try not to do this at mirrors immediately outside of major buildings because when you load in, you have to do everything you needed to do inside the building all over again. The best place to do this is the mirror by the water tower, as you instance right into this small area that's literally just a tower and the mirror, break the mirror, and then quit to menu. And then when you load back in, you are a short walk away from the instance to the water tower. Doing this means you no longer need to worry about getting apathetic, although there's other reasons you won't have to worry about that either. There's no need to worry about dying or needing to jump around days or doing that ridiculous mini game that I can't talk about. After I did this once, I was basically topped off for amalgam for the rest of my time in Pathologic 3, which significantly improved my experience. And then we've got travel skip. If I had to guess why this one works, I think it's maybe that each district of the town is one entity, and so long as you don't have a planned path, it doesn't matter which threshold you enter or exit from. Travel skip is stupidly simple. Once you start fast traveling and hit a rioting or infected area that you do not want to be in, do a 180 and just walk out the threshold you came in from. Then you press Z to clear your plotted path, and then just remake the exact same path you were previously following. The game assumes you're coming out of the district now, and you can just skip through everything. This one is especially important because of another issue the fast travel system has. It double dips on time loss. Traveling through an infected or rioting district takes up the time that you spend physically walking through it, but then it takes the time that you would theoretically have fast traveled through it on top of that. So you're getting double dipped here if you go all the way through as they intended. If you are especially tight on time and trying to complete a certain quest before the day ends so you don't have to repeat it all over again, you are going to need this one. So I don't know if this is really an exploit, but I'm putting this one here anyway. It would seem that the Ice Pick Lodge has attempted to heavily curtail the hobo economy in Pathologic 3, and that has only given rise to what I am now calling hobo capitalism. So in previous games, you were able to trade with basically everyone for everything. It was part of the game and the culture of the town on the Gorkhorn to scrounge every trash can and bin that you can find to look for anything that might be of value and use it to trade up with everyone you see until you had everything you needed. You cannot loot the bins in this game. You can only loot the designated looting boxes that will always spawn in the same places every day and will only have certain specific things. You are also no longer allowed to trade with just anyone you see. You aren't even allowed to go into the stores anymore, and there isn't even any money to spend. You can only trade with one, count them, one specified child in each district, plus a single sketchy shop guy out in the streets of any riot districts that temporarily replaces a child while the district is rioting. There's a smattering of reagent-specific traders that will come to your base of operations in the Stillwater, and they kind of feel like they're there to prevent you from dooming a save file if you don't have enough of a certain item, but we can work with this streamlined trading system. If anything, we're gonna be rich. Step 1. Acquire seed capital in the form of a gun as soon as possible. You don't even need to spend any money for it in this game, or even find it. It's literally just given to you the first time you enter a rioting district. Hell, it comes preloaded with 5 bullets for free too. Step 2. Perform rounds of funding to make sure you have at least 4 bullets. You don't need to do this once you get the gun the first time around since they come pre-packed, but it's pretty easy to do at the start of any day. Leave the Stillwater and go straight to the adjacent district, the Bridge Square. Loot the designated looting boxes, which are always in the same place for tradable items and will always have things that the nearby child in front of the polyhedron wants to trade for, like for things like bullets and more calomel. If you don't get up to 4 by trading with that child, repeat the process in all adjacent districts until you're up to 4. Now, go to the nearest rioting district and remember to load your gun because you're not allowed to have it out anywhere that is not a rioting district. And time for step 3. We are going to exploit the standoff mechanic to, rather than keep the rioters still and at a distance from us long enough to pass through the area, we kite them into a tight grouping and then fire off 3 shots. Do not shoot them directly. You cannot loot them if they are dead. 3 shots fired in close proximity of each other will make the rioters get on their knees and surrender. And you need the 4th shot because it seems the AI pathing doesn't like too many people grouped that close together, so you need to fire off 1 extra shot to spook the 3rd guy in each pack. Extract all the value from these guys. They will have all the calomel and bullets, although a recent patch did say they tweaked their loot, so no promises, that you could ever possibly need. You will likely get more bullets than you expended subduing them. You're going to literally get more high value stuff than you can physically carry off to the sketchy trader, even with putting stacks of medicine in your hotbar. Oh, by the way, as I'm recording this, I just realized they also got rid of upgrading your inventory. Now, go over to that trader and liquidate your assets to increase shareholder value. Trade for him for things the kids like to trade, so you can get more bullets and more calomel and more medicines that make you manic. Congratulations, you are now a high net worth individual thanks to the CEO mindset. Doing this solves what little survival elements are left over in Pathologic 3 from Pathologic 2. You will always have a fully loaded revolver and multiple stacks of healing items in your hotbar at all times. You will have so much useful stuff that you will run out of space in the consistent storage in the clocks, and you will have to find new places inside of the Stillwater to store all your stuff. This also solves the mood system because now you can intentionally get your mania all the way over to the far end of the meter and go full stand, start running around the town at freeway speeds, and it doesn't matter that you will die in less than a minute from being so hyped up because you will have multiple stacks of calomel just in your hotbar alone and more in the clock storage, so you can just constantly be mashing F to heal yourself as you go. There are no consequences for this. This is what Icepick Lodge is trying to tell us through the game Pathologic, that we must adopt the CEO mindset and get zooted out of our minds and run around the town at freeway speeds? Hell yeah! I'll take that over whatever the Canes are going on about. And finally, we have the Shabnyak hunting exploit. This one is also very simple. Whenever you're in an area with 2 Shabnyaks and you need to figure out which one you need to destroy in order to cripple the plague, you lure one into the flames and see if the chaser is the true Shabnyak. If you discover it's the imposter and not the one you need to kill, just walk out of the infected district and walk back in, because the roles are assigned randomly every time you enter the district she resides in. If you want to be really stingy with your matches, you can just do the quit to menu thing like we were doing with amalgam farming. Just keep re-rolling the infected district until you get the chaser Shabnyak to be the correct one, and shoot the projectile at her to reduce the plague. And no matter how many times you have to re-roll it, this is still going to be far faster than whatever is going on with the hider Shabnyak. So I'm pretty confident in saying that these exploits will still be in the game by the time you see this video, because while Icepick Lodge has done a lot of patching, 6 updates and 11 hotfixes at the time of writing, they haven't touched any of these. Part of me thinks that this is because some of the systems these exploits are tied to are things they can't really mess with, like how Amalgam is bound to player profile, but mirrors and Amalgam providing things are tied to the in-game save. Or perhaps the way they built the fast travel network is that there's only 1 node for each area, and fixing that would mean massively multiplying how many nodes there are in the game for each threshold you could go in or out of, which might really mess with the fast travel system. Or maybe it's that there's just only 1 node for whatever area you're presently in. I don't know. I'm not a game dev. I do not have intimate access to how they did this under the hood in the game's engine. The other reason I can think that maybe these and others that I didn't find or haven't been discovered yet, because Lord knows this is not a polished product, is because these all have the happy incidental effect of fixing the game's balance issues. Sure, it arguably trivializes some major mechanics like amalgam and time travel, but Thanks to these exploits, you don't have to worry as much about how certain things, either broken or just poorly balanced, can lead you into a save-destroying apathy spiral, because you can always just go farm a bunch more amalgam whenever you need to. It's harder to notice how rigid the inventory and trading system is when you're always topped off on all the stuff you need thanks to kiting around rioters and taking advantage of the surrender mechanic. And when you're kiting the rioters, you tend not to notice how you don't have to worry about patrolmen swiping all the good loot off them in a fight, because there just aren't any active patrolmen in the rioting districts anymore. For that matter, like, there's a few static NPCs at the entrance to the rioting districts, but they do nothing. I think you can only really talk to them once, and that's to get the gun. And there's nothing for them to loot anyway, because if you accidentally do kill one of the rioters, their body ceases to exist. Also, that sucks even more because killing a person basically brings you all the way down to like near maximum apathy. So just don't do it. Don't murder. Exploit via capitalism. Part 4. Other issues with the game that don't fit into the previous categories, which is everything else about the game. It's not exactly a secret that Pathologic 3 launched as a buggy mess, but it goes a little deeper than that. Just about every facet of this game is undercooked. You're gonna find those little grammatical errors I mentioned earlier. The UI is confusing at times, but in the sake of fairness, they've done a couple fixes to it in patches that happened after I played the game. Quests and dialogue trees are just straight up bugged at times. Sometimes you'll catch the soldiers T-posing at you as they spawn in. It's a million little things that say there was not a lot of care put into the QA of this game. There's other quality of life stuff too, like how the thought webs that act as your quest log feel overly complicated, and sometimes a single conversation will result in 2 or sometimes 3 new steps of a quest line where that all could have easily been just 1. It feels like clutter for the sake of clutter to make it look more complicated than it is. There's also how the Mind Palace minigame we've talked about a bit before will sometimes have items you need to look at just not trigger properly, or sometimes the minigame itself just won't give you the prompt to activate it. Sometimes that's the case, but you can enter the Mind Palace anyway, which, by the way, is not me mockingly comparing it to the BBC Sherlock show. They actually call it that in the patch notes. I could probably keep going, but as I write this, we are well past the 30-page mark in this script, and for all the issues I have with the state of the game, be it mechanically or from a polish standpoint, I think you get the idea. Everywhere a corner could be cut, it was cut. Every place an idea could be undercooked, it is undercooked. I know that game dev is hard, and hell, I have been a champion of leniency on devs myself in the past, but you gotta remember that Icepick Lodge is a studio with over 20 years of experience under its belt. I don't exactly know what the heck was going on in the last 7 years almost between Pathologic 2 and the release of this game from 2019 to now, but we can't blame all of that on the pandemic. I knew Pathologic 3 was going to be a disaster on launch, less in an insider info kind of way and more of a, hey, if memory serves, this was announced in late 2024, and even though it was supposed to be a DLC for a game that came out in 2019, it was slated to be out sometime in 2025. All of 2025 has came and went, and the game is not out. That does not bode well. So I went and intentionally held off on playing Pathologic 3 for a whole month after launch to give them a little grace period because, well, I do it for other games. Hell, after playing VTMB 2 a month after it launched, which was actually because I was on vacation when it came out, I haven't touched it since, and I'm watching the patch notes to see when the time is right, and now I realize such behavior is folly. After giving Pathologic 3 that grace period, I now hold one new belief. No Man's Sky and its consequences have been disastrous for the quality of work that game developers think that they can get away with. After No Man's Sky went from a disaster to a hit game, and then Cyberpunk 2077 proved it was a repeatable thing so well that parts of the Cyberpunk fandom try to memory hole just how bad that game was on launch, and now every other game is coming out in a state of unacceptable quality, with the devs making a post on Twitter going, "We're so sorry," and promising to fix it in subsequent patches, and praying they've built up enough goodwill with their fandom to get away with it. However, this creates a problem of mindset. When you're in the weeds, working on any project that's starting to feel overwhelming, if you have the idea in your head that you can just patch something after the release of the game, you're eventually going to start looking at all the problems you need to solve and going, yeah, that's one for a post-launch update. which frankly sounds like the video game equivalent of a director saying, "Yeah, we'll fix it in post." Unfortunately, there are some things that you just can't patch out, like the core loop of your game being boring once you look past the bugs, or if your plot is poorly communicated. You can patch and patch all you want, but at the end of the day, you cannot build a whole house out of drywall repair kits. You need to have a strong foundation. I don't know, and I can't possibly know if this mindset was prevalent or even anywhere at Ice Pick Lodge, as I do not have a crystal ball, but what I can tell you is that there are some things that just can't be fixed with a patch, and even if they somehow could, it doesn't matter because you only get one first impression in life, and a near unplayable game with amateurish writing is not a good impression. Let's move on to the everything else of the everything else segment. First off, unless you're willing to bang your head against the wall a lot, this game will require a walkthrough. Actually, presently you will need a walkthrough even if you are willing to do that, but who knows, maybe they'll finally patch it out one day. They've been doing a lot of patching lately. Presently, the need part comes from that there are some quests that are straight up bugged, and you'll need to either use exploits to try and wrestle with the developer console if you want to do them, or just outright avoid them and not fall into some sort of save trap. And some of these quests give you edicts that are vital to saving the town from the Steppe pest. During my period I played, which was for the record February 14th to February the 27th of the year 2026, I used a walkthrough and I was open about using it on stream. No one complained, and frankly, those who were brave enough to come by and witness my big Steppe Crashout were sympathetic to my cause. I've been keeping an eye on subsequent patches since then, and so far, some broken quests are seemingly unpatched still. And lucky for me, the actual saint who wrote the guide I was following is still actively updating that guide to reflect new patches and things that get fixed. And I can just see that things like the infected house are still bugged. Heck, I Control F'd the word bug on that walkthrough and it appears well over 100 times. You need guides, less because you can't figure out what to do on a given quest, even though some of them are about as obtuse as early 90s adventure games, and more as to have yourself a way of being warned when something is not working as intended, because if you bang your head against the wall too much in this game, you get apathetic for too long and you lose all your amalgam and you lose your save file. The guide is less of a cheat sheet and more of a canary in a coal mine. It's also very much worth examining how, despite the many lofty claims about the Pathologic series being oh so much better than its lowbrow peers in the world of video games and the platitudes it made back in the Kickstarter funding, that Pathologic 3 has a lot of very lowbrow stuff in it that they alluded to being better than. First off, we have one of the many forms of the Skyrim quest arrow of hand-holding the player to the point that they never need to learn how to navigate an area. Throughout Pathologic 3, there will always be this little trail of wind or whatever it is leading you down the path to wherever the nearest major quest is in a given district that you are in, like wherever it is. You will never have to actually look for something or even open the map to see where the thought bubble is on the map. You can hold the focus button to summon this thing at any time, and if you get really hopped up on mania, it starts manifesting in the real world without the need for the detective vision. What happened to Pathologic being a game about learning to navigate a town that's designed to speed up the power of destiny or whatever civil design stuff and walking all the funny paths? What happened to that? Now we've got fast travel to go anywhere we need to, combined with a quest arrow that takes us to exactly where we want to be, as if we had horse blinders on. At this point, we might as well slap yellow paint over everything important and get the Ubisoft UI in here. Oh yeah, speaking of that focus mode, you'll be using the Batman Arkham Backwater Town Detective Vision to see basically anything in this game. Who you're supposed to talk to, what weird little items that you need to hold the camera over at specific angles for a specific amount of time to get the Mind Palace working, which boxes you can and cannot loot. Important context of the game's story is locked behind Detective Vision. You are going to be using this constantly alongside the quest arrow, a lot more than you'd like in a game called Pathologic, because what the hell is signposting? Oh yeah, we have that Mind Palace minigame. Let's talk about that directly now for one last time. It feels heavy-handed. Like, despite going on about how smart and special you were if you were gonna back the Kickstarter a decade ago ago now, actually more than a decade, it worries that the player is incapable of getting basic ideas that are being presented in certain scenes, unless they do a big showy thing of floating words that help you spell out exactly what is going on. The Bachelor is no Agent Francis York Morgan. The mystery he solves can very much be dealt with in a conversation, which is ultimately where all these Mind Palace things lead to, and every part of this game for that matter. This game is 90% staring at some NPC's dead eyes in a black void, reading through text. Just look at all the thumbnails for my video footage here. This is what I was getting at when I say that Pathologic 3 feels overly complicated and obtuse, but also dumbed down at the same time. We have everything in insane walls of text conversations and having to juggle time travel and managing a plague without ever really treating anyone outside of some diagnostics, but we've also got the Skyrim quest arrow for everything we need, and we need to constantly be in detective mode because otherwise we're never going to see what we really need to see to progress. It feels like I had all these big ideas, botched the execution, or just simply did not know how to implement them, and then frantically threw in all this stuff to try and make it manageable, which is how we get this mess that's almost entirely unplayable without using some serious exploits, and is very easily argued to be not worth playing in the first place when you look at everything in this video. Another thing, the fourth wall breaks are no longer cute and have gone full into bathos. While previously back in Pathologic 2, you were a little more eased into the fourth wall breaking with hints that the Haruspex is playing the role of a doctor and such. We come right out of the gate in Pathologic 3 that it's all the show to be performed and the doctor can do whatever in a very long tutorial of the game. And yes, while that line is in line with the original storytelling of Pathologic in a loose interpretation, it does not change the fact that we're being told all of this is a performance at the beginning. Come to think of it, depending on what you consider to be the game proper, the tutorial is like 3 or 4 hours long before you're even into like the actual game trying to save the town from the plague. It doesn't really help that during most of it, you jump around days out of order, going from one day like to day 5, then to day 3, and finally back to day 2 in order to like actually start saving the town, which, geez, I'm not even sure that's the right order. I'll double check it, but leave like a graphic on the screen if it's wrong. And it feels like a lot of this jumping around is on purpose to obfuscate just how long the game is taking to give you all the information you need to start playing. Back to the bathos though. If the characters in a story aren't taking the stakes seriously, why should the audience? Pathologic 2 didn't get crazy with the whole player on stage stuff until very late in the game, when someone has to come and replace Artemy because according to the story, you're doing a terrible job at saving the town, and there's the implication that every time the Haruspex dies, you get a new Artemy. And this is a wholly new attempt to save the town, which I cannot believe I am saying this, but BioShock Infinite did this same idea but better, but only by the merit of remembering that brevity is the soul of wit, and having it only be alluded to once, that each death is a whole new attempt. How did this game get me, the guy who started coming into prominence on YouTube by ripping apart BioShock Infinite, get me to say nice things about BioShock Infinite? In Pathologic 3, you were immediately hit over the head with the fourth wall breaking, despite Mark Immortel not being nearly as prominent in Patho 3 versus Patho 2, because when you die the first time, you go to the scene in which you're told about Amalgam, and then every death after that, you just load a save. Oh hey, there's another thing they gutted from the previous game I forgot about until now. There are no more penalties for dying, because all the traditional survival elements are gone in favor of Amalgam. I'm trying to stay on topic here, but there's just so much about this game that is just wrong, and you end up having to be everywhere at once. Speaking of how much of just everything Pathologic is, it's also very, very long for the story it's trying to tell, but not in a way that is remotely enjoyable. For reference, after my first go-round and a half of day 9 in Pathologic 3, I was at 27 hours and change. Mind you, that's with the walkthrough I needed, so I was successfully not wasting a ton of time on bugged quests. I tried to not rely on the guide whenever possible. I guess that if I wasn't walkthroughing this, I'd be up to 30 to 35 hours at this point. If I even made it that far, banging my head against quests that are either so obtuse they're outright hostile, as if to waste your time, or just possibly broken. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it's malice or incompetence. As far for that day and a half thing, they also stop you prematurely on the first go-round of day 9. Quick addendum here, it's actually day 7 where this specifically happens. Just I got them mixed up in my head. To railroad you into fixing a problem by fiat instead of puzzling it out like everything else up until this point. But I'm not gonna get into it any further because I am still exhausted from writing and recording Abiotic Factor, and this script isn't exactly small either. It's also much more strenuous to be negative about something than it is to be positive. And unfortunately, I have nothing nice to say about this game. And we're getting sidetracked again. As a point of reference to the 27 hours it took to get about 2/3 of the way through Pathologic 3, Pathologic 2 only takes 20 hours and change to get through the whole thing on the intended Imago difficulty. And that's with no guides or anything. It's just playing the game and figuring things out for yourself. And Pathologic 2 earns every minute of that playtime. Yeah, it's tough as hell and can be a slog at times, but it never feels like it's not worth doing. And if anything, the brutality makes you want to play more, just so that you could get to the end of the infection, just to spite it all and feel like you genuinely accomplished something for beating the game on the intended difficulty. Pathologic 3 does not feel like that. It feels like it's wasting your time by being tedious and as verbose as possible, laboring under the delusion that more time played equals better game. Pathologic 3 absolutely did not justify how long it had taken to get to this point, as much of it is replaying days over and over again, waiting for time-sensitive things to happen, but lucky for you, it's not too hard to optimize your days, so you'll only need to do 2 or 3 go-rounds most of the time, provided the game doesn't decide to prematurely end the day because of a special event. Mind you, also at that point, I had figured out how to do the fast travel skip, and the game was starting to attrition me out of painstakingly reading every last line of dialogue out loud, because there was just so much of it. Like seriously, as I think of it more, a good way to describe Pathologic 3's dialogue is that it's as if you're playing Fallout New Vegas, except every character has been replaced by Ulysses pretending to be that character. Would you like Sunny Smiles to teach you about how to shoot a gun? Too bad! 30 minutes of being talked at about regional politics. You want to fix the radio at the Good Springs Balloon? Well, guess what? It's time to hear more about the bull and the bear. That is what Pathologic 3's dialogue system feels like. Side note here, I did do the DLC run of Fallout New Vegas with only California compliant weapons. I just haven't made that video yet because it actually ended up being not much of a challenge thanks to all the insane buffs and weapons you get in Old World Blues. Like I said earlier, the game's writing is in desperate need of an editing pass and needs to get cut down in a few places so that the longer conversations with more important stuff can be meaningful, and so that the game doesn't feel like it's bloated in its playtime. As it stands now, the game is a severely bloated mess owing to everyone being overly verbose, and that you're going to be doing the same days over and over again to unlock the next day. And God help you if you screw up a major questline and need to restart the day to reset it. By the way, remember, a single wrong choice in a dialogue tree can bring about the need to do that. And speaking of doing days over and over again to get everything right in order to press on, the entire time travel mechanic robs the player of agency and ironically makes the game extremely linear. When you have all the time to make all the choices right and have unlimited do-overs to just keep replaying quests until you get the best possible outcome, that's what the player is gonna do. And the result is that you're basically doing an 100% attempt run on your initial playthrough instead of playing to experience the game first. Part of me is wondering if this might be another little fourth wall break in reference to how a lot of players in Pathologic 2 would save scum to get all their bound alive by the end of the outbreak, or perhaps even a jab at that, since it seems that warning us about time turning in the loading screens in the last game wasn't enough, so they just made it part of the game. This has worked before in different series. For instance, the best example I can think of is in the Firaxis XCOM games. XCOM 2 takes place in a world where humanity lost, and pretty badly too, which reflected the majority of people's playthrough. I'm not sure this works here, as I'd wager based on achievements that most people didn't even make it to day 5 and... Okay, you know what? You got me there. I have found one thing that is genuinely witty about the writing and narrative design of Pathologic 3. Well played, Ice Pick Lodge. I now have one nice thing to say about your game. This doesn't change that by making the core of the game about rewinding time until the player is able to make all the right choices to save the day, they're effectively making none of those choices because you don't have to choose. You just keep redoing the day, selectively resetting quest lines while keeping the ones you did perfectly locked in until they're all done perfectly. There's no tough calls about which of your you need to spend your precious time going out to visit to improve their immunity, or which quest lines you follow and which you choose to ignore and cross your fingers and hope that it doesn't come back to bite you. And by that stroke, so much of the tension is just robbed from Pathologic 3 because there are no consequences for ever running out of time or doing anything wrong. You just go, Ah, crap, I gotta reset this one. Remember that it costs no amalgam to restart the day that you're actively on, unless that gets changed sometime between the time I played and now, because they're tweaking everything. So even if you aren't doing the amalgam exploit for whatever reason, you're fine to repeat the days as many times as you need to. There are no consequences for messing up except wasting your own real world time. So now, instead of a tense, chaotic experience where so much thought goes into everything you do and every path you walk, and you're now just faced with an endless slog of going to the same places, having the same conversations over and over again until you get the ideal outcome, and then you go to the next day. One last thing here before we have our mental break. And no, not the relaxing kind, but the RimWorld kind, because there is no end to this pain. No one is eating at a table tonight. The faces in this game are just wrong. The main thing I can put to words here is that if you look closely enough at them when the NPCs say their little quips that are completely disconnected from the text on the screen, you'll notice that the mouth motions are completely independent of the eyes and the movement of the head. Like any head movements of the eyes and upper face will be on a set loop, and just the mouth opens and shuts, ignoring it. Having the characters stare at you dead-eyed as their mouths open and shut with minimal effort is just so uncanny. Facial animations are one of those things that are like brushing your teeth, where if you do it well, no one notices, and if you do it poorly, everyone notices, and it makes them very uncomfortable. It absolutely does not help things that the overwhelming majority of this game is reading through dialogue where the characters just stare at you like that with their one animation on an awkward loop. Geez, we figured out good animations like in 2004 before the first Pathologic game was even released. And hell, you can do face mocap with a cell phone now. What is this? Are we too good for whatever rigging software VTubers use? Now, I gotta word this criticism carefully because I don't want it to be misconstrued. So as a disclaimer, I do not believe that any part of Pathologic 3 used AI generation of any sort, and I have seen no information so much as suggesting that. However, the faces and their animations very much remind me of those crappy AI-generated video ads. You know the ones, where the body just kind of undulates and the face is completely still save for the mouth movery, and maybe a strange undulation of the head that like moves in a mockery of how like a human naturally moves. I know there is no way this is AI because for one, a lot, if not the majority of the NPC models are copy and paste of the one in Pathologic 2, and for another, you can tell that among the new ones, there were certain characters that the devs fixated on, and they look a lot better than the other new model. Be that for some kind of weird favoritism, or because they knew this character was going to be talked to quite a bit. Editing Charl here. You know, as I look at a lot of models very closely, it does seem like a few of these did get updated. Not all of them. Some of them, like Mark Immortel, look so close to each other that if there is any serious changes, I am having a very hard time seeing what they are. And additionally, like we said earlier with Artemy Barak, that seems to be the same model with some kind of odd filter over it. However, I took a closer look at some other major characters, like Laura Ravel, and it does look like the model has been very much updated. Particularly, if you look closely at her hair, you notice that it's a lot more detailed now compared to the previous game. And then also, same story with Daniil Dankovsky. They changed their hairs, and it also looks very high end, and that makes me wonder, is that where like all the like, you know, extra stuff that doubles the file size between games comes from, that they updated models and made them very high poly? I don't know for certain. I do know that most of the original town map is basically the same with the bits and bobs added in, and they do have the several new areas. This is something that like, I did not notice at all that some models were updated until I was literally looking at them shot for shot right next to each other as I'm editing a video. And when I was playing both games individually, they do look like exactly the same model if you're like not scrutinizing it right there. So I don't know what's up with this right now. I don't know if some got updated and if some were copy pasted or if they just like hit subdivide on the model. It's just, they're so close, it's hard to tell. Speaking of those older models, I think I have an idea of why Artemy was so off-putting in quarantine. And no, it's not because of a new, yassified model. I was mistaken. Now that I have seen more of the characters in context, there seems to be this weird, glossy filter over certain characters, or perhaps anyone who isn't overtly sick. everyone looks all shiny and stuff, like they've got some kind of Instagram photo enhancement filter on them. And it just makes all of them look even more uncanny. And again, this would not be nearly as big of an issue if it wasn't for how you're talking to so much of the NPCs in this game. Or perhaps clicking through text while they stare at you with those lifeless eyes is a better descriptor. Part 5. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Okay, time for the admission that a lot of you have probably figured out. I tapped out on day 9 of round 1. I had just gotten through the hard part of day 8 where we spent a literal hour on stream wrestling with a broken quest that we were unable to finish last stream, which on top of being so obtuse and poorly laid out that you can entirely lose out on the reward that you need for managing the plague by picking a single wrong dialogue option. That is, if you figured out that you need to go talk to Eva in the still water before even starting this quest, you can just not get the reward despite doing everything right. It's a known glitch at the time of me playing and writing this video. Then, to make matters worse, the rest of the quest is extremely buggy, featuring an at times unresponsive context prompts, an infuriatingly slow set movement speed, and also there's this guy that will trigger a conversation with you every time you get close to him, and every option is a massive hit to your apathy. And they forget to put a set limit on how many times this conversation can be triggered by proxy, and the guy is in an extremely narrow hallway that you have to pass through multiple times if you are going to do this quest. So close, in fact, that unless you are actively holding the movement keys to get away from him as soon as you leave the conversation, it will engage again within a second of leaving it. With us getting stuck in this conversation multiple times, trying to squeeze by this guy in the hallway. And once you go into this house, you cannot leave until you finish the quest. If I wasn't amalgam farming, I would have probably lost my save file here. So after all of that, and getting past the initial part of day 9, where some retcons start, or at least what I think are retcons going through the Bachelor's retelling of events start happening, I learned that through trudging through the quests and dealing with the especially tedious Inquisition arc, that while I can now get as far as day 10, there are things I just cannot do because during the time I needed to do them, I had no idea they were things that needed doing. No, for real. You get as far as day 9, and then it tells you if you want to get the good boy ending, you have to go all the way back to day 2 and complete a chain of quests requiring you to play through the whole week again, following this new quest line that emerges from the ripple effect of going back in time and fixing the thing that you did not know you needed to fix. According to the guide I was reading, this isn't even the first time you might have to do this if I wanted it the best, you use loosely here, ending. And even if I am loaded for supplies on every day thanks to hobo capitalism, and I take advantage of sleeping in the bed at the Stillwater to skip time, that's still hours of retreading previous days and a ton more amalgam farming, since I'll be doing a crap ton of jumping around days in the timeline. It was at this point that I looked at how long I had been playing the game, 3 weeks on stream and 27 hours on my Steam profile, and I asked myself, do I think that based on everything I have experienced here thus far, that I want to do it all over again, possibly twice, just to make it to the credits? And I said no. This is a clearly unfinished game, and if Ice Pick Lodge could not be bothered to finish making their game, I cannot be bothered to finish forcing myself to play through it. This game outstayed its welcome 25 hours ago, and frankly feels like it is a late alpha, maybe a very early beta if we are being generous. This should have been released into early access. I have made videos about games where I wasn't able to finish it in the past, and I say so, like say if the game is very time investment heavy and I've played enough to where I am intimately familiar with how the game functions. But this is only the second time I have ever outright refused to finish a game. If you're wondering what kind of company Pathologic 3 keeps, the other game is Hello Neighbor, a similarly miserably broken experience. And I'd just like to remind everyone right now, I was able to get all the way through Aliens Colonial Marines on the PlayStation 3. I think that for whatever reason there might be, Ice Pick Lodge may have been unable to get a QA team to look over Pathologic 3 and needed to rely on player feedback, which did not work out at all. So many of the serious issues and exploits that may or may not have been able to be fixed are things that, for one, a casual player probably would not find, and and for another, even if a professional playtester or QA team member did decide to play through the demo and look for issues as if they were being paid to do it, there's no way they'd find all these things in a 2 to 3 hour vertical slice of the game. And the result is the mess of all these updates and hotfixes, which when you read through all of them almost feel interchangeable at times, and a miserable end user experience. In the sake of fairness though, Icepick Lodge has been frantically patching the game since its launch, now that the bug reports must be pouring in. And at the time of writing, the last one was on March 17th. Presumably there will be another between the time of me writing and recording this video and the time I intend to publish it, going off the cadence of the updates thus far. They have also listened to player feedback that they got from quarantine, as the version of the mood meter we got there versus what was in the final game was heavily toned down, but it was still pretty excessive, as they've toned it down even more in a recent patch that came after I stopped playing. I have been reading through those patch notes as they come, and there's still no solution for that day A quest as far as I can tell. Now we get to the namesake of this chapter of the video, which is something I ended up screaming on stream as I was slogging through this game. I remember that when I went and purchased this game, I saw that the game had a very high rating on Steam, and then went back and looked at the text in the reviews, and people are doing this insane thing where they're gassing up the game and calling it absolute cinema, which is a phrase that has lost all meaning, but then going on to talk about how bad everything about the game is and how it's the worst in the series, yet nonetheless everyone is absolutely glazing it anyway. I understand why, and so many of the positive reviews for Pathologic 3 that are rated positive are nothing but talking about how awful the game is and how far of a step backwards this was. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills! And then out of morbid curiosity, I went and looked at the Metacritic score to see if there was some sort of disconnect between like players, fans of the games, and critics. And by the way, for like the 3 of you that saw that thing I vague posted about on Twitter that actually bothered to follow through for this video, this is it. What I'm about to talk about is the thing that changed my opinion on everything about this game, going from bad to unforgivable. Okay, so either I am taking crazy pills here, or everyone else but me is taking crazy pills. This is insane. Pathologic 3 is presently sitting at a 79 Metascore, with some outlets giving it their equivalent of a 9 out of 10 and having no mention about the bugs, pacing, or technical issues whatsoever. And now, you know what's even more wild about that? A bunch of these reviews were all published in January, close to the game's release. They are playing a far worse version of what I played, and they are still absolutely gassing up this game like it's BioShock 4. I'm losing it here. It's so strange. I also noticed that not only are there considerably less critical reviews this time around compared to Pathologic 2, but there's also been a complete reversal of opinions between critics and players on Metacritic, where now players rate the game lower than the critics did, with the player score dropping a full letter grade between games. And mind you, that is with a few 10 out of 10 reviews that say I am overtly a fan of the Pathologic series, so I am rating this highly. So I decided that I should start reading through these critical reviews, because at this point I am morbidly curious about all these 9 out of 10s and how they're justified, and maybe I am just missing some critical factor. And on one hand, it ended up being reassuring, as some outlets corroborate some of the stuff that I thought I was going crazy about, like all the spelling and mechanical errors in the text. But also at the same time, they all just heavily downplay how buggy the game is at best. However, there is one outlier we'll get to in a sec. And I can't help but notice that some of the review screenshots have no UI in them, and that sometimes I'll see what look like the same screenshot between different reviews. And they are all perfectly framed up, which while it is an option to hide the HUD in this game, these all look very press kit-y to me. Like, what do you mean needs a little more time in the oven? This game is so undercooked that if I told you exactly how undercooked it was, I would get a legal letter of demand from Fox Entertainment and Civi 11. If I were to read every last bug fix and change they have had to do since releasing this game so far, it would triple the length of this video. At this point, it was driving me nuts. So I actually went back and checked through my email as I was writing the script, because I swore that there was a press kit that was sent to me with like screenshots and stuff. And it turns out, not only is there a press kit, which I was sent, unsolicited mind you, it came from a blast email that I am somehow subscribed to, despite me not recalling ever subscribing because I didn't know who Hype Train was, and also I have unpublished my business email for the last 5 years. And yeah, a couple of these reviews are indeed using the press kit screenshots instead of their own. But it gets better. Within that press kit, There are pre-baked game saves from the publisher that let you skip past the entire setup of the game and go straight to the end of day 6 of 11 without having to do any of the infuriating crap to play the game properly. Plus another save that takes you straight to the end of day 8 with everything set up to play through to the end of the game. Mother of God, if you use the save at the end of day 6, that skips the first 18 hours of the game based on my own recorded footage. They even give you a little written tutorial on how to splice these saves into your game files so it won't confuse Steam's cloud save feature. The way they worded things about the day 8 save also feels like it's implying they already did all the extra loop arounds you need to do to enter the end game properly, which means that could be potentially skipping 90% of the game if you use this save. As an ad-lib, as I'm editing this and further scrutinizing what they're saying in this README, it comes off as first as like, oh, this is just for like if you were playing the game pre-release and the saves are going to be different. But that leaves me with a few questions. Like, for one, the biggest one is if this was only for people who had pre-release access to the full game, how come this was sent to me who did not have full pre-release access to this game? For another, like, why not just give them a heads up warning that like, hey, plan accordingly, because like, I don't know how recently they got like their advanced access to the game. Also, if this was to make sure that all critics could get their reviews out in a timely manner, how come less than a third of the people that reviewed this game were able to get the review out within a week of the game launching? And moreover, this same document says that most of the changes you make, aside from making saves non-compatible due to moving to whatever build of the game you did or however it works under the hood, you say that most of the things that you've changed gameplay-wise are in the first part of the game. You know, the part that like people would actually want to play fresh to experience? Just the more I scrutinize this, the less it makes sense to me. Editing Charl here. We're going to do a couple CYAs real quick. First and most obvious one, do not harass anyone involved with any of the stuff in this. I do not condone it. I do not want you to do it. Don't. Second, all of the stuff involving the reviews is getting a big fat allegedly. While I can see the save files with my own eyes, I have no way of proving or disproving that anyone used it because, well, you can't prove a negative. It's impossible to prove that someone did not use these save files because, well, unless they have an entire playthrough handy to show us, like, again, you can't prove a negative. I will say, however, that I will find it highly suspect if anyone says that they did not know about these save files because, again, as someone who has seen this with their own eyes, it is the first thing you see when you click through the link to the media kit. It is right there next to the screenshots. So if you have screenshots from the press kit in a review, which is very hard to deny because for one, I have a copy of them too now, and for another, all the press kit screenshots use the old version of Pathologic 3 that has a different font from the final game. So if you use them, I find it highly dubious if you deny ever knowing about these save files, because when you click through the link to the media kit, they are literally right next to each other. It is the first thing you see, is saves and then screenshots. Now, I will be the first to admit that I am an outsider to the games industry and games media, as I am a filthy YouTuber. But I still occasionally get press kits sent to me, like this one. Plus, there are plenty that are available to the public. Abiotic Factor had one, and it was a great help because press kits are usually filled with very useful things, like nice looking screenshots with no UI, or PNGs of the game's logo, which makes life so much easier when you're making thumbnails for videos, and maybe like a few GIFs and stuff for written articles. But never in my 14 years of doing this have I ever seen a press kit contained pre-cooked game saves that let you skip the bulk of the early game or even the majority of the game to get to the ending. I've never heard of anyone receiving one of these either. Is this a thing? Do game journalists regularly get game saves that let them skip most of a game? I guess that's one way that the reviewers wouldn't be able to notice 90% of the bugs if they skipped 90% of the game. I literally never asked for this either. This was sent to me in a blast email. I don't even bother to check for this until I was looking at the reviewer's screenshots and went, hey, this seems a little press kit-y. Was there a press kit? I should go look for one. And I searched for my email and sure enough, it was there in a blast email. And it was just a link to a media kit that had these saves just right there. I can't believe that once again, being a complete moron has prevented me from being tempted to the dark side. Maybe I wasn't supposed to see this as I checked the metadata in the press kit, and these saves were added to the press kit 2 days before the game's release, which could also explain how a lot of reviewers got their articles out so fast, despite me taking almost a month to get to the first go-round of day 9 in a game that takes 2.5 go-rounds of 11 days to get to the end, according to the guide I had to follow, because the game is so broken in some places. Going off the Steam reviews, it looks like playing the game takes 30 to 40 hours if you know what you are doing and are willing to glance at a guide every now and again in case you get stuck. But now, this begs the question of, did they expect no one to bring up that the publisher provided pre-cooked saves? As part of the press kit? Pre-cooked saves that let you skip at least half of the game that they recommend you doing? This is nuts. Am I crazy? Is there nothing wrong with this? Am I just losing my mind here based on psychic damage I have taken from trying to read these people's understanding of dialectics? Now that I know that these saves exist and were sent out as part of a press kit in blast emails to anyone they thought might cover the game, which again, I don't even ever recall signing up for those emails from the publisher, so they might have bought my info from one of those press lists that I know exist. I don't know. For the sake of transparency, I did exchange emails with another member of the publisher's team, but that seems to be an entirely separate department from whatever was going on here, as it is related to another thing we will get to in just a sec. What matters is, I cannot take any critical write-ups or any critical media about this game in good faith now that I know these saves exist. Unless I can see hard evidence of the reviewer or critic playing through the game, particularly the tutorial and the first 7 days on their own, I cannot trust anything they say by the fact that these saves exist. This is not something you do when you are confident about the quality of your game and want to let it speak for itself. It's no wonder that a bunch of the text-based reviews of this game heavily downplayed the bugs, or maybe they just didn't notice them. There is a non-zero chance they use saves that skip past the majority of the game and likely had all possible edicts unlocked up to that point. If that's the case, they likely didn't have to slog through the side quests either. Is this even allowed for stuff that's going to get aggregated onto Metacritic? I feel like actually playing the game for yourself is a very important part of forming an opinion for critique. And hell, I'll say this because I am literally doing it right now. It is a completely valid part of a critique to get to a point in a game and say, no, I don't want to play this anymore. I have seen all I need to see. It is the game critic's equivalent of walking out of a theater. You know, I was going to spend some time scrutinizing one of these reviews, talking about how this screenshot here might be indicative of using a provided save, since there's no way for you to save all of your bound from the gallows in the first go round of the outbreak. But also, if you were at that point where you had played through the first 9 days twice already, there's no way you'd still be using the effigies edict, because by that point you have unlocked far more effective edicts, and the only reason you'd have a scenario that leads to this particular screenshot is if you loaded up the save on day 8, provided in the press kit, breezed through the entire Inquisition questioning part, being able to save all of your bound because someone else did all the quest lines for you, and then you just put whatever in all the edict slots the night before, like day 9, because some seemingly unimportant edicts are actually vital to saving the town. But you would not know that unless you've been banging your head against this game for nearly 30 hours, actually playing the game. But then I realized all the screenshots in this review are credited to another website. So there's nothing we can tell about this reviewer's playtime except for that they're not using their own screenshots or the press kit screenshots, but some third parties. Honestly, I don't know what's worse. It's really, this whole thing is hard because you can't prove a negative. So there's no way to tell one way or another, or if like someone did or did not, but the existence of these save files creates a shadow of doubt. On a brighter note, this guy here, who seemed to absolutely slam the game, seems to have actually played it because he brings things up, like how bad the tutorial placement is, and how excessively the wordy characters get in the early game, making it hard to get into the game proper. You know, things you'd be only aware of if you actually played the first half of the game. And then he goes on to talk about how the game, like, also very easily, like, ropes you into a bad ending. And I've linked the Metacritic page in the description for all of you to read through yourselves if you want to and make your own conclusions. I have never regretted streaming a game less than I have right now, because I have proof I played this game. All the clips you are seeing here in this video are cropped stream VODs, and there were multiple witnesses to me actually playing the game and the resulting psychotic break. This presently makes Solmatol and I the only reliable sources on this game right now, because not only did she get through the whole game herself, but she is literally cited as the primary source in the walkthrough I had to reference whenever the game didn't feel like doing game stuff. I didn't want Pathologic 3 to be like this. I was initially excited when this game was announced, but I didn't buy into the hype and publish your stuff gassing the game up and was just hoping for a competent sequel, not some sort of insane quasi-religious experience of a game. But in the end, I got neither of those. I make it a point that I do not accept free copies of a game whenever possible, and frankly, after everything I've seen here, I don't think I'm going to accept them at all, no matter the circumstances now. It just creates a measure of loyalty that will inhibit your candor. One last addendum, because this mess just gets weirder the more I look at it. Something else I noticed when directly comparing the reviews between Pathologic 2 and Pathologic 3, just crawling through all of them, is that a lot of major outlets that went and reviewed Pathologic 2, like GameSpot, Destructoid, and Rock Paper Shotgun, opted not to review Pathologic 3 for whatever reason. And another interesting thing is that while PC Gamer seems to be the biggest major outlet that is giving Pathologic 3 the time of day in a review, whereas in Pathologic 2, they had somebody that was like one of the original staff members of PC Gamer write the review. This time around, it's a contributing writer, like somebody who, as far as I can tell, just like submits articles or something. I'm not sure what a contributing writer is by PC Gamer standards. And that just makes you think more like, why did all these major outlets opt to pass on talking about Pathologic 3? For all I know, though, that's probably nothing. It could just be that these major outlets looked at the game and decided, you know what, this is just not worth our time anymore. I don't mean to say that to be mean, I'm just trying to steelman people here and try to assume nice things about people. But it goes deeper. I was one of the many who was offered a quote-unquote voiceover role in the game, which while I was initially excited for and agreed to do, the more I learned about the game, the more I felt like this was kind of a red flag, and I ended up blowing it off, also because it was less of a cameo and more for just soliciting background noise for a certain quest, which when I got to that quest, I could not make out a single individual voice. Lucky for me, it seems Icepick Lodge wasn't overly concerned about having me in particular in the game because they never followed up with me. Bullet dodged. I also have confirmation that there are indeed creators known for making videos about Pathologic in this jumble of voices, but I can't personally make them out. It's one thing to have that measure of familiarity with a game because they reached out to you and offered you a freebie, but it is a whole nother mess when you are in the game. And at this point, we're bringing it all back to the beginning because I am not the charlatan here. I am the child in the streets pointing out that the Emperor is parading about in his pajamas. I have no connection to this game or the developers that would make me pull my punches, and I played the game myself to see how bad it is with my own eyes, and what I saw was awful. In recent years, there's been a downturn of critical videos about games or shows or anything, because thanks to the hell vortex that is fandom culture, it's frankly a scary thing to do at times. You never know what is going to set someone off who ties too much of their own personhood to a piece of media and do something really stupid. It is a fear in the back of the minds of all creators who make anything remotely critical. Geez, I was around for peak Tumblr fandom shenanigans centered around stuff like Steven Universe, Undertale, and that Voltron show, but somehow it's gotten worse. Maybe not directly here in the Pathologic fandom, but as a whole, it's enough that a lot of creators are feeling less critical, or at least less willing to be publicly critical. However, in this right here, in light of all of this game feels like we have gone beyond the pale. Fandom and long-term feelings about a franchise are being used to ignore or obfuscate criticism. Fandom culture has reached such a fever pitch that some producers seem to be relying on the fan base to just gobble up whatever they put out and use whatever algo speak is in vogue to endlessly praise their stuff, no matter how good or bad it is. And then I remember all those Steam reviews I looked at for Pathologic 3 and realized that now, more than ever, that we need to be critical of things, even if they're from series we really like. We can't just let them hide under the covers and like stroke their head and tell them, it's okay, boo-boo, you tried your best. Because they're not like a 6-year-old that face planted running the bases playing t-ball. This is a studio selling product for money to make this game. I gotta cool down. I gotta do something. Addendum here. After I learned about all of this, it just did not sit with me at all. So I went back and I finished this game out of spite. I did not bother with any of the looping back because the game also really hammers on, oh, you need to go back to this day. Oh, you need to go back to this day, and really doubles down on telling you things that you need to have done before you could have possibly known to do them or whatever. You know what I mean. And at that point I realized, you know what? I'm just gonna do my medicine. I'm going to hunt the Shabnyak and I'm gonna hit the credits. And the game loves to scold you about, oh, you didn't do anything. It's like, you didn't even make a proper game. You don't get to scold me. And that leads us to here, where I can say that the extra 3 hours it took me to just bull rush my way to the credits did not feel worth it. This whole game did not feel worth it. Out of the 30 hours it took me to play this game, the first 3 were iffy. Then from like the 4th hour to the 27th hour, it was the most miserable time ever that I would not have done or continued with unless I was making a video. And then those final 3 hours were fueled by pure spite. So that I can say, I actually played this whole game on my own, and I have the footage to back it all up. From a gamer's perspective though, it was not worth it. Not at all. Nothing in the finale of this game justifies the entire body of this game. It does do this thing where like it takes you right back to the funny clock room where you can go back and use the same save file to try and unlock other endings, but you know, you're kind of overplaying your hand there because that implies that people want to play more of the game in the first place. I know I'm being petty at this point, but again, this is just fueled by my shock and spite at the whole affair. Oh, also, I got a clear soundbite of Daniil Debkovsky's voice actor overtly mispronouncing the word step. I saw a bunch of people talk about that and I didn't hear it until, that was the one silver lining here, is I got a clear thing of him saying Steppie. When I think about this and everything else I have talked about in this video, I really wasn't intending to be anywhere near as big as the last one. I am certain of one thing. In the nearly 7 years between games, Ice Pick Lodge has not grown as a studio. They haven't even stagnated, because stagnation is a lack of change as everything around you develops. Ice Pick Lodge has outright atrophied in their design and narrative abilities, and it's everywhere around me. You don't have to worry about patrolmen swiping your loot anymore, because it seems they just didn't bother to program a faction system into the game this time around, at least when it comes to the raiding districts, as no NPCs infight anymore as far as I got, and even if you did kill someone, instead of making them surrender, they just cease to exist and there's nothing to loot. And I don't think there's one anywhere else in the game, because you can only pull out a weapon in rioting districts, thus negating the need for any sort of faction system in the rest of the town. The writing very much feels like a rough draft, to the point that it's hard to figure out the actual intentions of the story, besides being very wordy wherever they can be verbose, because verbose equals witty and deep if we just pretend that there are no other metrics of writing prowess in the world. And on the note of pissing away all the goodwill you've earned over the last 20 years, this game reminds me a lot of the Yakuza series, in that the town is a near one-to-one copy-paste of the last game, save for a few bits here and there to change things up a little, plus a handful of new areas tacked onto the town. Also, how is this game nearly twice, actually no, over twice the file size of its predecessor installed onto my hard drive? And it takes forever to load. And it also, like where the previous game was one seamless town once you got outside, we have to section off all the different districts of the town into separate loading screens that also take a very long time to load. I've got this on an SSD. Overall, the game feels very rudimentary from a game perspective perspective, being an overt regression from the last game. NPCs have very little pathing if they move at all, and your UI and inventory has been dumbed down so much that I saw a recent patch let you straight up hide half of it, since you can't really find any other guns to replace a revolver anyway. There aren't even melee items or surgical tools. I played Pathologic 2 on release, and it was nowhere near as bad in any aspect as Pathologic 3 is, and I've been comparing the two. It's impossible to ignore this regression. And wait a minute. I just realized another thing that makes this all make so much more sense. Oh my god, Pathologic 3 is mascot horror! The amateurish game design, the wordy and obtuse storytelling that at times feels like it's being vague to entice YouTubers into making lore videos, the tons of bugs that get so bad at times that you need to exploit the game to get through it, the freaky monster that follows you around in a certain segment that just has really bad pathing, but if it somehow gets you, it grabs you and goes, ah! And you just die? The overly long tutorial that pads out the game well past the point of being to refund it on Steam? Ice Pick Lodge got so avant-garde, they accidentally went full circle and made 12 nights at the town on the Steppes. But no one's going to say that out loud because we all want to look so refined in the presence of the Emperor, because we play cult classic horror games that you probably haven't heard about, except for that Pathologic series is infamous for next to no one bothering to play the games for themselves, to the point that that's perhaps why the publishers felt they needed to include those saves in the media kit, meaning there's a chance they didn't play through the whole game, but we don't know because we cannot prove a negative. It is just an overwhelming shadow of doubt. I am trying to move on from all of this. It's Jesus Christ. I don't know what exactly Ice Pick Lodge was trying to accomplish with this game, but they have made the video game equivalent to a first draft of Infinite Jest, coming to a performative male playing it on a Steam Deck on public transit near you. Or not. There is no way to spin this. This game is going to forever be a millstone around the neck of Ice Pick Lodge. There is no saving this. As I was drafting my outline for this video, I initially had a segment where I was going to pose the question of if this game can be redeemed, but the more I played, the more I realized I already knew there is no redeeming this. Even if you were to fix all the bugs, completely rewrite the story, fixing all the grammatical issues and refining the story down to be more meaningful, and somehow rework the game to get rid of the exploits that aren't really glitches so it's not a simple, straightforward patch, you'd still have a dud of a game on your hands. This is why you can't make things with the mindset that you can fix it all later after release and rely on the goodwill of the fans in the meantime, because there are some things you just can't patch out and you only get one first impression. A first impression of a dull core gameplay loop, a lack of features that made the previous games compelling, or how your plot lines are so convoluted for the sake of being convoluted you are esoteric by your own series standards, and it's going to be near impossible to go back and fix any of this because so much of your gameplay is tied to the dialogue, and rewriting the game means redoing the dialogue trees, which are already known for being a little buggy and sometimes not activating certain flags when they need to, like for the quest rewards. So, I don't know. I don't know what to say about this, but I'm going to try and be at least a little productive here because this video has been well over an hour of me just wailing on this game. Even if I think this game cannot be redeemed, it can be cleaned up a little bit. First thing, you are already using the Mass Effect colors for Apathy and Mania. Give us Mass Effect dialogue colors too. Highlight the text in the color of how it'll affect the Bachelor's mood. Maybe change the color of the little arrow or something as we hover over the dialogue options. Just give the player feedback before they click on something, since you cannot convey the tone of what you're saying just through text. Let us see our mood meter as we talk to people, as it's not a matter of immersion, since you tell us the time we take up talking to people anyway. Apathy and Mania in conversation is already contradictory to the idea of the player inhabiting Dankovsky as a character, like in a show, on a stage, like we are hit with over the head at the beginning, because rather than choose the option that we think will be best suited to what Dankovsky might do in this situation, we're just walking through this literary minefield, trying not to get too bummed out or zooted out by misunderstanding the tone of which a dialogue choice will be said in universe. Secondly, make our choices more meaningful by adding more amalgam cost to things, mainly resetting a day or restarting a quest. Presently, since there are no penalties for either, the player is effectively making no choices because they get to keep re-rolling until they get the ideal choice instead of having to make the hard choice of what you do and do not try to fix. It's like if the D6 in Binding of Isaac had infinite re-rolls on every floor. If you're going to make a big fuss about how amalgam is precious, and if you lose all of it, you lose your save file, commit to that regardless of the exploit you can't seem to fix or won't fix based on all your patches. I don't know what your true intentions are. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see into people's heads from across the world. On that note, as I'm revising this script, here's another freebie for you. Let us spend amalgam to roll back the conversation and re-choose lines of dialogue so we don't have to replay the entire goddamn day to redo the entire goddamn conversation in the quest. Okay, some things to keep in mind for Pathologic 4 because Pathologic 4 kind of has to happen now. Remember that originally what eventually became Pathologic 2 was supposed to be all 3 characters, but it was just the horror specs. And now with The Bachelor being its own game and the Kickstarter promising all 3 characters, and to Ice Pick Lodge's credit, they are doing everything in their power to deliver what they promised. It's gonna be really weird if the Changeling story ends up being a deleted DLC for Pathologic 2. I've talked to some people who backed the Kickstarter 12 years ago now, and yes, they are getting keys for 3 based on the backing of the Kickstarter. So here's what I do. Throw out everything you did here and just focus on making a 1-to-1 remake of the Changeling story like how you did with the horror specs. Pathologic is a story, but no one could tell it in a movie or an episodic television show. Maybe a comic, but we're getting off focus. It is a story meant for a video game, and it doesn't matter how flowery you make your prose or how lofty the ideas you botch presenting are. If the game this story is attached to is garbage, people will not want to engage with it. Now for a few predictions of my own. First off, Pathologic 4 will happen probably by 2035 to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the first game, and it will be with a 3rd publisher. Patho 2 was Tiny Build, Patho 3 was Hype Train, and if I had to guess, if they somehow pull a hard 180 while making Darkwood 2, Pathologic 4 will be published under Hooded Horse. However, based on what I've seen here, I have a hard time believing such a miracle will be pulled off, and Ice Pick Lodge might end up taking anyone willing to fund them unless it turns out that making Darkwood 2 was part of an agreement to get them to fund Pathologic 4. Also, I am very sorry if after telling you everything about how horrible this game was, that this is how you learned that Darkwood 2 is being made by the same guys that did this. I don't know what the mindset was trying to make Pathologic 3, but I think it's time we've come to accept something. Pathologic was lightning in a bottle that we might have gotten a little close to in Pathologic 2 because we were trying a 1-for-1 remake, but in no way was this ever meant to be a franchise. A 1-to-1 remake is one thing, but a so-called reimagining is a disaster, and at this point I feel confident in saying that it should have never existed in the first place. 20 years is a long time, more than long enough for the original team behind something to change, and for the magic that made a freak accident happen to disappear. I know that they're kind of obligated to make Pathologic 4 now, but I really wish they wouldn't. Every subsequent game seems to cheapen the experience even more. I think that's enough. At least, I think that's as much as I can do. There could be more, but I don't want to. This was already a very negative video, and I'm bracing myself for making that Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 video for Halloween in July, and oh god, that's a doozy. Why did they make MCU speak Malkavian? I thank you all for slugging it out with me on this one and making it to the end of this video. And if you liked the video, please leave me a like and maybe a little comment about your own experiences with this game if you unfortunately have them. It really helps me out a lot. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. Also, if you're new here, I am very sorry this is your first impression. It would also mean the world to me if you help support what I'm doing here by going over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder and pledging to help keep the channel going strong. If you're not into monthly commitments, I do run a Ko-Fi page too. But for now, let's sign off. Remember that what you do is art, not content. And it is special because you do it. Art is a sacred, wonderful thing that's made with all your skills, passions, and dreams, and it should be treated as specially as those things are to you. So get out there and fight for yourself by fighting for your art. Stay saucy. This boy, I have the box of bubble mailers for all the aprons out, and I was letting him there, let him sit there on it because I was gonna set up the printer. But no. The traditional cardboard box is not good enough. He must have the laminate paper cardboard box. Sir, I need to get the thing inside of this box. It is very important. It is how we make aprons. Look, the center has your flamingo. Are you going to stand for this? You know, I don't want to push you off because I know you're going to get upset. So I'm just going to try to pet you till you leave. Oh, 1 pet. 2 pet. Oh, I'm too fast for you now. You're getting slow.
But sir, you gotta get off this. I need to open this box. You can have this box back when I'm done opening it and setting up the contents of this box. But for now, I need you to get off this box. Oh no, don't start lounging. I just gotta... There you go, you can sit on that box. Look at you doing your hardcore parkour. You can sit on this box, angrily loaf at me all you like, and then, when this box is done being unpacked, you can have it back. Does that sound good? Is that an acceptable bargain?
Shatnaka take it. The golem of Steppe legends. Myth.
Of
fiction.
Steppe legend. Oh.